Good morning. There is an old anecdote of Golda Meir. The anecdote goes back to probably 50 years, early 70s. And the story goes that she came to the United States to talk to President Nixon. And they were talking about their different forms of government. And one thing they said is, well, they started talking, comparing how difficult it was to lead their own countries. And Nixon said, well, I'm the president of probably at that time 200 and something million Americans, so it's very difficult. And Golda Meir said, well, I'm the prime minister of 1 million prime ministers, so it's more difficult. Now, the point was, of course, that she was making, that the Israelis are very opinionated about politics, or about everything, actually, about politics, and everybody knows how to run the country, everybody knows how they would do it better than the current government, and that also leads to many people complaining and criticizing, which is not surprising. But complaining and criticizing, it's nothing new, not even 50 years old. It goes back, I don't know, 2, 3 millennia to biblical times. And we see it, for instance, in what we read today, Korach. Korach now is an extreme example of complaining. It was a rebellion. And before Korach, and even after, there were many complaints and criticism from the people. Now, there are differences in the way Korach handled the situation and the other complaints. The complaints, we could say, the community complaints or general complaints, were anonymous and leaderless. The Torah says, and the people complained to Moses because they were afraid, and the people complained because they were afraid that the Egyptians were going to kill them. They complained because there was no water, or the water was no good, or complained because they were hungry. In the case of Korach, and nobody was a leader there, they just complained. Korach came to Moses and Aaron and said, well, the Torah says Rav Lachem, which is translated / interpreted as, it's too much, you have done too much, it's too much for you, you have gone too far. Meaning that, and he added, the community is holy. The whole community is holy. Why have you raised yourself above the community to be the leaders? And that it's something that the community itself never did before. They also have another type of complaint saying that Korach took Korach, first of all, was a cousin of Moses, first cousin. They belonged to the same tribe. And he took Datan and Abiram, which were 2 brothers, members of the tribe of Reuben, and 250 of their followers, and they went to Moses and Aaron and started complaining about them. In this case, there is a leader, which was Korach, and we know, the Torah tells us, the names of the people, not of the 250, but at least the top leaders of this rebellion. Another comparison is that the alternatives. What did the community want when they complained? They say, well, if they were hungry, they wanted food. If they were afraid, they wanted safety. And what was the response? Usually, God, sometimes by means of Moses, intervened and gave them what they want, and sometimes God they want either water or food, but they also were punished. What did Korach want? He wanted a change of leadership. They thought that they would do a better job, that they were not only that, but Korach was entitled to be the leader of the Israelites, and also they complained why Aaron was made the Kohen Gadol. Since Korach felt that he was also a Levite, he could be the Kohen Gadol. What Korach did wrong was several things. First of all, when he was challenging Moses and Aaron and telling them, why have you raised yourself above the community? It wasn't true. They didn't raise themselves above the community, they were appointed by God. So the challenge was not only against Moses and Aaron, they were challenging God. Now, the motivation. The people were motivated by a situation on the ground. They were motivated by hunger or fear or thirst. That's what they wanted to change. But the motivation of Korach was completely different. He was motivated by personal ambition, jealousy, self-interest. Another problem with Korach's action was that it disrupted the unity of the people, but creating a division between the people. Some people would support him, some people still support Moses. So he divided the community. And then Korach did another thing. He misunderstood, or wanted to misunderstand, the nature of holiness. It's true, God says, you are all holy, you are a community of holy people. But not because we're all holy, it meant that they were all capable of leadership. Not everybody can be, in this case, holy, but there were certain people that had to be leaders, and they were appointed by God. This is some of the differences between Korach and the rest of the community that were complaining. Now, the rabbis, of course, later on of the Talmud, had to draw a lesson from Korach. And the lesson is in Pirkei Avot, in the Talmud, the sayings of the fathers, that says that every argument that is for the sake of heaven will endure, will last. But every argument that is not for the sake of heaven will not endure. And they give an example. What argument is for the sake of heaven? Well, Hillel and Shammai, for instance. Hillel and Shammai were two rabbis of the Talmud, I remember correctly, from the 1st century, around that time. And they disagreed on almost everything. When it came to halakha, to interpret the Torah or analyze the Torah, it's, I don't know, more than 99% of the time they disagreed. But they conducted their arguments with mutual respect and taking into account the other's position. And then their purpose was to clear points of the law or of the Torah that were not clear. And that's why the Talmud records both positions, because they were both valid, except that one was accepted and one wasn't. But what the example of an argument that is not for the sake of heaven, that's Korach. Korach wasn't interested in the betterment of the community. Korach was interested in himself. His motivations were jealousy, power, self-interest. And that type of argument will not endure. And that's something that we can take up to today, arguments that we can see at national level, at international level, and even at synagogue level. The arguments should be for the sake of heaven. In other words, should be for the betterment of the community and not for self-interest and just criticizing for the grace of criticizing. Like we can just looking at watching the news, it's happening all over the place. Shabbat Shalom.